Having now completed 2 games from my childhood, I've become more and more curious about some of the classic franchises I never got to play during my youth. I had missed out on a handful of titles that many remember fondly as a significant part of PlayStation's history. One such franchise was Tomb Raider, the adventure series about a gorgeous woman exploring temples, and would be heavily criticized for 2 big problems. And that's all I really knew about the franchise up until now. I've somehow managed to obtain the entire franchise between my Steam and PlayStation 4 accounts. So with there being 3 games touting themselves as quote-unquote the first game, in some manner, which one serves as the better introduction to the series? Which one features the best version of Lara Croft? And has the character deserved the scrutiny she's received in recent years? Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. My name is Ty with MojoPlays, and this is a retro review of Tomb Raider, and Tomb Raider Anniversary. Ha! Knew one of them was going to try and stand out with a subtitle. Before we begin, we publish new videos all week long, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. And if you're curious about what else I'm playing, or you're looking for more games to discover, give me a follow on Twitter at GhostWriterTyler. Just to help avoid confusion, I will be referring to each of them as the original, the remake, and the prequel. Let's start by going all the way back to 1996, back when the name Lara Croft was still new to people. The story isn't exactly well explained through the cutscenes, but as Lara, you must recover an artifact that's been split between different regions of what is believed to be Atlantis. After a couple of somewhat lengthy cutscenes, you're just thrown into the game. As someone who had never played a Tomb Raider game before, I can immediately see what made this game so revolutionary. For its time, the environments are eerie and evoke a mysterious atmosphere. Lara is also well animated between simple actions like walking and climbing, and her jumps provide enough oomph from launch to impact. Considering what had not yet been achieved in 1996 gaming, this is pretty impressive. I only wish I could say the same about the rest of the game, as I continued finding design choices that have made the original age terribly, the controls being my biggest gripe. While running and making simple jumps feels fine, it's the sections that focus entirely on platforming that make the experience infuriating. In order to overcome the platforming segments, you'll have to press one button to jump and hold another button to grab onto ledges. While this does add a sense of suspense and makes jumps riskier to connect, there are times where the connection between jumping and grabbing the ledge feels a little too finicky. I'm willing to chalk this up to technical limitations and the game possibly being ahead of its time, but I'm not about to forgive the game for it, especially since Lara controls so poorly even when idle. There were several moments where I had to try and be extremely precise with my movements, whether I was trying to line up my jumps properly or simply pick up an object. A simple tap will cause Lara to take a few steps too far or make a short leap backwards, and more often than not, it covers too much distance. This results in the player spending way too much time to perform basic tasks, and when trying to overcome some tricky platforming, it can easily send Lara to her death. Combat isn't all that better either. While I do like the idea of having a single button tied to switching between exploration and combat controls, there isn't much to defend you from enemy damage. It all boils down to leaping through the air like a maniac and mashing control until the thing is finally dead. It's fine by 1996 standards, yes, but that's really all I can say about it. It's a combat system that, like its controls, has not aged well. Audio, on the other hand, I'm a tad conflicted on. Personally, I feel the sound design works for and against itself. The lack of music allowed me to be alone with my thoughts without anything to distract me, and I could quickly identify what enemies were coming around the corner. However, hearing Lara's footsteps and her footsteps alone during the calmer moments doesn't exactly scream adventure and raiding tombs now, does it? Add in some drawn-out pacing and level design, and the original kind of falters in the modern age. It seemed as though Tomb Raider wasn't going to be my kind of series, until I booted up the remake.
Now what's a man gotta do to get that sort of attention from you?
If that's the sort of attention you want, Larson, you're well on your way.
At first, I was only expecting a one-to-one recreation of the original game, with some new visuals and maybe some updated character models. However, my expectations were immediately blown out of the water upon entering Croft Manor. The remake manages to fix just about every problem I had with the original, while making decent portions more fleshed out. For starters, Lara handles like a frickin' dream. Every moment is fluid, every action is done at a reasonable speed, and you're even given access to a piece of gear introduced in Tomb Raider Legend. The grappling hook makes platforming feel more treacherous, making it a fantastic substitute for manually grabbing ledges. Though if you prefer that mechanic, you do have the option to toggle that on or off. Levels have seen a massive overhaul as well, giving players a clearer sense of direction and trimming out the many unnecessary moments of climbing rocks before reaching the next major segment. Combat no longer requires a button to switch stances and has made dodging easier thanks to the implementation of a new mechanic. Dodge at the right moment, line up the reticles, and you'll be able to counterattack the enemy and potentially deal lethal damage. Bonus, Lara looks badass while doing it. Despite me falling madly in love with the remake comes with its own share of problems. While combat did get exciting at times thanks to a little more presence from the music department, the AI isn't all that bright and can't seem to figure out how to walk around things some of the time. It's like once a small pond has made its way between us, they suddenly have the intelligence of a lemming. The camera tends to freak out at certain times too. It never got in the way for me, but it's still pretty jarring. Even with these problems, though, the remake is my absolute favorite. Unfortunately, its excellence was partially responsible for my growing apathy towards the prequel. The 2013 Tomb Raider prequel reboot is rather, how do I put this, problematic. Don't get me wrong, I can admire the attempt at telling a new story and trying to reintroduce Lara Croft to the world. I only wish it was done in a light similar to the remake. While the prequel tells a decent story of Lara's first adventure, and controls just as good as the remake, everything else surrounding it feels like it was done so under the pressure of outside sources. The loudest example of this is the overall presentation and set pieces. Much of it feels like it's trying to compete with the Uncharted games and Ubisoft's lifeless sea of open-world games. The crafting and RPG progression system feels arbitrary, only being in the game because every AAA game was doing it back then. It ends up feeling less like a Tomb Raider game and more like AAA Game the Video Game, starring Lara Croft. Then, of course, there's the elephant in the room that comes up every time we talk about Lara Croft and her portrayals. I'm all up for a story that illustrates a younger, less experienced Lara, but personally, I feel some changes here were made for the wrong reasons. Prior to the prequel's release, select outlets had grown vocal about the possibility that Lara was the star only for attracting men to the games, that she only exists to objectify women and appeal to, quote, adolescent male fantasies, as many of them put it. But there's more to Lara than just her physical appearance, and she's unfortunately gone through changes for illegitimate reasons. In what was probably a move made to avoid stoking these flames again, Crystal Dynamics would tell the press that toughness would define her. As art director Brian Horton stated to Game Informer, what our version of sexy is the toughness through adverse conditions. Well, if you consider traumatizing and putting this girl through all kinds of hell as toughness through adverse conditions, then I guess you accomplished that? To me, this level of brutality was done only for the sake of achieving shock value similar to that of a snuff film. While I take major umbrage with this version of Lara, I'm not entirely disdainful of the prequel game. There are some good ideas being implemented, such as the minimalist design in its HUD and waypoint system, allowing the user to take in the unique environments. I also like the idea of tombs as optional puzzle rooms. It's a great way to reward exploration and observation while presenting the player with a new challenge. Overall, I think I've made it pretty clear which Tomb Raider stood out most to me and which I believe is the better jumping point for anyone looking to get into Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider Anniversary was the one I kept coming back to for a handful of reasons. The controls are mwah! The animation is superb, and it's a fully realized version of the original and its archaic design. As for the prequel reboot, it's a product that got intimidated by the presence of Nathan Drake, Far Cry, and several other open-world games, resulting in grit and edge that feels too forced and forgets about what made Lara Croft so great in earlier games. She has her moments, but there's nothing astonishing that you haven't seen in other games. As someone who has never played a Tomb Raider game before this review, I'm way more inclined to go back to the older games instead of the newer iterations. I'll resume with the newer games later down the road, mind you, but they are not priority for me for the time being.
After all, you're a Croft.
No matter which way you look at it though, Lara's been dismissed for very unfair reasons over the last several years. If you want a game that feels like a fun adventure, one filled with the same level of danger and excitement as an Indiana Jones movie, Lara Croft will certainly show you a good time. Wait, no, not in that way, damn it! Almost made it through without an unintentional innuendo.
Check out these other great clips from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.